Oh, sorry, a child is calling out.
I've just had to your right. So we're very professional here at the Land Down Hunger Hangout, where this week we are chatting about a short story we read, which is The Plagiarist by Hugh Howey. We have covered the Silo series of the Wool trilogy by Hugh Howey in the past. Possibly link in the doobly-doo if Mel can be bothered, not sure. But we very much enjoyed his work previously. Actually, we read Sand, is probably the last one of his we've read. And I would say that we're big Hugh Howey fans, so we were quite keen to see what his short stories were like, especially since the first chapter of Wool is based on a short story. So let's kick things off. Kim, thoughts? Go for it.
I really enjoyed it, even though I know the main character I don't think was especially a good person necessarily. I really enjoyed it. I'd rate it very high. I think he did really well in the short format, but I think that's something he has proved to do very well. Being able to do a short format without leaving much out, sort of condensing it down to what needs to be there and not adding anything that he has to leave later, and you just sort of go, well, what was that about, or anything like that. So I think he's done a brilliant job with this short story. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't feel like it was too short, and I didn't feel like it should have been bigger, which is a lot of the problem that I have with short stories, that I think is too short. It should be expanded. There was more there. I think it was very well written, and it didn't leave me wanting more. Where there could be more, it didn't leave me necessarily wanting more or wondering about things that he may have touched on that didn't go into. So yeah, that was my feeling. So next.
Cool. Kirsten.
Same. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and I was surprised because I'm usually, like you were saying, Kim, I like to read long form books, and I often find with short stories that I didn't feel it was developed enough for me to care about what was happening. But I think this was just kind of just the perfect size for the story that it was telling. It was good. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I was the same as Kim. I didn't feel that like, this was good, but if it had been longer, it would be better. I think that he did a really good job with just containing the story to that short format. And usually I'm a character reader. I didn't really connect that much with the characters in this one, but I didn't feel like I needed it. I guess I was too interested in finding out what was going on with the story to have that be an issue, which is usually the issue I have with short stories, is that they don't give me enough time to care about the characters. So I think the plot for this one was just really well done, and yeah, I enjoyed it. We could probably get into more detail later.
Matt.
Well, I missed whoever's gone before Kirsten. Well, I heard part of Kim's. But I think I'm going to be really boring and say pretty much the same thing. I also normally don't enjoy short stories all that much. But this was really short. And I think it was pretty good. I actually think I would have liked maybe one or two more chapters. I could have gone with a slightly longer story, but I still quite enjoyed it. It obviously, like, it wasn't the most original setting, I guess. It's the kind of world that we've seen more than once. But I liked the thing I think I liked most about it was the idea of these people going into these worlds and sort of like taking their art. Like, not that I think that's a good thing, but I thought it was an interesting thing. It's like, when you're in this glut of media that's ready to be consumed all over the place and people are getting bored to shit with it, it's like, where does something new come from? And if everyone's art is defined by their experience and you're at a point where, new experiences are almost universal, then where does, something new and truly interesting come from? And I thought that was the kind of interesting idea that they would, that was the most valuable commodity that came out of this, other than the research, the scientific research, was the art. I thought that was a cool little twist on that kind of story. So yeah, no, I liked it.
So I'll go last. So I thought it was okay. Actually, to disagree with everybody, I thought it was quite predictable. And so I just, I was just kind of waiting, and it's classic Hugh Howey, kind of that setup, there's a twist at the end of the first chapter, or there's a twist kind of happening. And I know a lot of short stories or novellas or novelettes, whatever they're called, Mel can come up with, let us know what the right terminology is, play on this a bit, where there's a kind of a setup and then there's a twist. I struggled because it didn't really connect with the protagonist, and that is unusual in Hugh Howey stories, because the protagonists are often really relatable, and understanding their background, he builds a lot of empathy into his characters, which was, I felt it. It's hard, it's always really hard with people who are, basically have an addiction type situation. That I find they're not stories I really connect with per se. I also felt like the world building, and this might be where Matt is coming from, like I felt like I needed a bit more world building around this, building sentient universes, what that meant, what repercussions were, whether there had been talk about when you cut things off, what that means, what is the responsibility, that type of thing. Like I felt like there could have been possibly more building up around that, because I didn't really, which is probably the twist, is you didn't really get that until the end, when you realized, by the way, spoilers, that he was a sentient person. But Matt's just brought up something that I think is really interesting. It's so interesting around this plagiarism, which I think, you could basically call it appropriation, like, cultural appropriation for, lack of payment, lack of not identification, but lack of I don't know what the word is.
Reparation,
thank you. Because I kind of, like his mum kind of had everything on. It's like, well, this isn't quite right. Oh, they don't, if they knew, they would mind, right? Oh, but they won't know. So I think that is a really interesting take on this, and possibly what I would have liked to have explored a little bit more, like with that. So it wasn't like, it was okay. I kind of saw where it was going, and I just prefer his long form stuff a bit more, if that makes sense. So any themes we want to get into?
Did anyone guess the twist before the end, and how close to the end did you guess? Because I actually marked the point that I worked out that he was in a simulation himself.
I didn't mark it, but I worked it out fairly early, I think. Because pretty much when they first started talking about the world that he was going into being shut down because it was simulating other worlds itself.
That's
I was
the
like,
point. That's the exact point.
Yeah.
That's the exact point that I realized he was in the same situation, that his was simulated as well. As soon as they mentioned that they were making other server farms and that's why they were shutting them down, then I knew straight away. I'm like, are you going to throw a different twist at me, or is that going to be the twist? I was kind of hoping you'd throw a different twist at me that I couldn't guess.
Yeah. So I agreed with you when you said it was a bit predictable, Sarah, because I did see that coming. Especially then, once I sort of started thinking about that, and I was like, oh, so the haikus is like, because she was like, so like, can I have another haiku? Can I have another haiku? And I was like, I see what's happening here.
So that's an interesting thing then. Like, is there an implication that our world that the reader is in is the same simulation because it's a haiku and that's something that exists in our world? or because, you know, they set these worlds up, basically they spin up a planet and see how it evolves. And it's not always going to be humans every time unless they're, you know, setting some variables there. So, like, is that a little too meta for a short story, though?
No, I'm sure there was a bit in the book about how, she said something like that syllabic form hadn't been seen anywhere else or something.
Yeah. And she does actually refer to it as Earth when she's trying to get in the haikus out, and she's talking to him. She does say it's Earth, and that the haikus only exist. They haven't found them anywhere else. So he's basically saying it's the reality we're in. It's a simulation. We are Earth.
Yeah.
But I guess it would be hard to in a short story do it any other way, because it would have to be something we recognized, or the writer wouldn't be able to explain it.
Yeah.
If it wasn't something, he'd have to go into way too much detail if they made something up rather than something that already exists. And I think with short stories, setting them in the current time is easiest because you have to do less world building in that instance. You don't have that much time for that world building, so using things that already exist that everyone reading will know about, it's much easier and less. It's going to take a lot less of the story to write. Yeah, a lot less words to describe things.
What year was this written?
What year was the book written?
Yeah, I don't have my Kindle on me. Does anyone know when this was published or written?
It was fairly recently.
Let's see.
Never read Kindle, so I don't know where to find it.
It's like, how quickly can we? 2011.
Oh, actually, that's quite a fair time ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know other people haven't read it yet, but I think Hank Green read this. That's all I can say.
Oh, is that a spoiler for the second book?
Maybe.
Okay, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
I haven't either. I've got it.
I think it's one of the reasons is that because I've read his second book recently, which of course has a lot of and there's a lot of characters in it, and there's a lot of character, arcs and things. So that's possibly why I didn't find this as fulfilling, because I've been through that experience. So it's a little unfair to Hugh Howey when I've been through a very long format, which explores some of the, not all, but some of the same themes, which, but there's definitely diversions as well. But I would not be surprised, as Hank Green, huge sci-fi fan, wouldn't have read Hugh Howey's stuff. But at the same time, there's a lot of Hank Green's also exploring a whole other different type of things as well. But I think there's an interesting thing that, you touched upon there, Matt, about the plagiarism and the appropriation and, what's coming out and what's valuable as art. It's, even though this was written, 10 years ago, there's so much of that is true, even in much more recent times in the last 5 years with the rise of social media and the taking of video, people, I think a few of you guys follow CPG Grey, and he, had huge problems with people taking his videos and putting them, the rip, I don't know what there's a name for them, but like channels that will rip stuff off other people and publish them again. And you see on Instagram and stuff, we credited you, or, but you're getting the dollars, and it happens on Facebook as well. I'm not getting the ad revenue. You're getting ad revenue for my art. And I think it's really interesting that is what, is coming, he's almost foretold the future with some of this, or maybe saw it coming. We certainly had, we had YouTube, but it was only 4 years old at that point. And Google even acquired it? I can't remember.
I think it was really odd when it was when he was talking to his mother on the phone. He was recounting that conversation, and she said, "Well, your name's on the front." I'm like, why wouldn't they put it says, he's like, it says it in the copyright that I didn't write it. I'm like, that's really weird. I'm like, why wouldn't you put the actual author's name on there?
Is a
and then say, transcribed by that person.
Yeah, or collated by
that. Yeah, something like that.
it comes down to the discussion that we've had with science fiction books before about artificial intelligence.
How do they treat
And,
AIs?
Yeah.
it's basically
Yeah.
it's an artificial intelligence, so it has no rights and no, you know, and it's
Yeah, so why would you credit it?
murky.
Because it's not actually
Yeah.
a person. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I still think though,
it's weird. Yeah.
yeah, it is weird because I often think that, like, we'll put it this way, like, we quote stuff from books all the time, but we often use the character as the quote. Like, this was said by, I don't know,
I saw this.
Gandalf, or this was said by.
I almost see it as like
they're fictional characters who said something. The actual words were written by somebody else, but
Someone asked Brandon Sanderson this in one of his live streams, because I watch his signing live streams that he does, about when I'm quoting something that one of your characters has said.
Yeah.
Would you rather me quote the character or you? And he said, I would rather you quote the character and then my name, because he's like, sometimes my characters say really bad shit because they're like a bad person. And he's like, I don't want you to just put Brandon Sanderson after it, because then it sounds like I'm saying this horrible thing. So he's like, he'd rather you put, you know, the character name or the book name and then by Brandon Sanderson, because he's like, I don't want people to misconstrue and say that it's just something.
And it's also about,
I thought that was an interesting take on it.
That is really interesting. I didn't think about that from that point of view, but I think there's also something about, well, yes, the authors created this, you know, this character who has lived this life that they have created for them. But this quote is from the character, you know, like, it's from that experience of the character, like, it's born out of, you know, that. And I guess that's the thing, is like, it's not born out of, I'm trying to think of an example where, you know, you're trying to sort of say, I'm not, you know, the character is saying something because they have been through X, Y, and Z. So when they quote that, you go, oh yeah, or that you go, okay, what happened with that character that they got to say, that they've said this thing? Whereas, like you said, if it was Brandon Sanderson, go, what the hell happened to Brandon Sanderson?
Yeah.
You know, like, exactly that.
The context matters.
And I think depending, like, something like Gandalf has so much. Like, everybody know, well, you know, not everybody, but a lot of people would know that name and know what story it's from and who the author was straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas other things that are more, you know, obscure or less well known, people might not realise that that's the author of a book and that was a character that said it.
Yeah. Like, there's a quote of Brandon Sanderson's, and I've often thought that too. Like, what do I say? Which is, you know, the job of a storyteller is to not to tell you what to think, but to give you things to think upon, which is one of my favourite things. But like, that's said by, and I can't remember the name of the character, but that's the one who turns up in all the stories, Kirsten. You've read them all.
Howey.
He's the Howey,
Howey.
it's him, right? And it's interesting about that character. But I've often said, like, but I would always, you know, I was like, I'll put the book in so that people know what book it's from, you know. But yeah, it makes me like, yeah, it's a good point. Makes me think now. I'll put a boy on it.
Going back to the whole thing about putting your name on the book rather than the sentient who wrote it, I think it's only weird to us. I think in that world, which is, you know, our world, whatever. At this point, like, it seems like the vast majority of people don't see these worlds and the beings in them as anything more than just an elaborate computer simulation.
Yeah, a lot of people don't actually have these systems.
And
it's almost like
if
I went and mined something out of the ground and said, here's gold, buy gold. It's like, no one cares because it's a rock that came out of the ground. I'll say, hey, here's gold by Matt Bailey. You know, it's like I went and found that, so I'm putting my name on it. They treat them no different to a natural resource.
And if they started down that slope,
or an artificial resource,
they would have to start considering the athlete. Like, so if they were going to put, like, the name of the person who wrote it on the book, then they starting to acknowledge that they're a person. So then they'd have to go down the ethical thing of, well, should I be going there and stealing stuff from them? Should I be going there and you know, telling this person lies and fast forwarding all the boring bits so I can have sex with them? Like, all of these other, like, things that happen that are not you know,
It's like it's a lot easier to exploit a culture if you
thinking of these
dehumanize.
people as more than a simulation and more than an elaborate computer game, then there's a whole bunch more ethics stuff that comes out. And I wonder how much of it is like, we're just going to bury our heads in the sand about this because we're benefiting from it.
Yeah, and I think if you look into the past, which is what I was kind of pointing at before, that happened a shitload. White colonialists were really good at that.
Mm.
You know, let's
other the person so that then you can take advantage of it.
It suits us to treat the indigenous people of this nation as flora and fauna.
Mm.
So let's do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why I forgive the.
And we don't want to have people hungry.
Yeah, exactly. I forgive the predictability of the book. Not that I got it straight away. I kind of thought it and dismissed it because I thought it was too obvious. And then later on, I'm like, oh, okay, no, it is actually that obvious. But I kind of forgive it a bit because I don't think the twist was the point of the story. I think that just happened. That was a bit of like how things were going, and it's
how
like,
do you end
that's not and it wasn't the point. I think what we're discussing now is more the point of the book. It's like looking at it through that lens, and it's like
Yeah, it humanizes the sentient beings more because you thought this person was a flesh and blood person all along. Your main character, you didn't know originally was that, so it sort of adds to humanizing the other simulated characters in the book as well.
Yeah, but I would have liked to have spent more time on the world with the sentience that he had come to know, which I can't remember which one it was. What was it? I can't remember.
Bellatrix.
Yeah,
on Hammond, on the world Hammond.
Yeah, on Hammond. Yeah, I would have liked to spend more time with his girlfriend there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other twist that I thought might happen, is that she might turn out to be another person who was in the world. Like she was actually not an AI. Like does it make sense? And that was the other thing I thought was coming, where she was going to go, actually, I'm that, you know that one you're talking to? That's me. I thought that was the other twist that I thought was coming. And then that didn't happen. So, yeah. I don't know if anyone else thought that. It was actually, it turned out.
Yeah.
that she was also
when he was like,
trying to mind
when he was
stuff.
like, I'm, you know, you've got to come with me. I'm from another world. I was expecting her to go like, yeah, well, duh. It's like, but no.
Like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I am also not here all the time.
I also thought
that's what I actually thought was going to happen.
I thought because you mentioned, Sarah, about how it's Adam, isn't it? Adam was the guy's name. He wasn't written with a great deal of empathy, but I also don't think he was meant to be either.
No.
True, which is and I think this is probably why I'm struggling a little bit, because I do know that the first chapter from Wool was a great short story, but also that character, spoiler, pause. That character's dead by the end of the first chapter. So, you're never going to get them again, right? So you don't really have a lot of, you don't have a lot, time and empathy for these different people. And then you meet the ones you spend more time with. So I think so. I think it was probably that I wanted to understand this world that had captured him a lot more, this person who had captured his heart. And then that would have been even more, like you said, Matt, that would have been more what do you, like that thing of going, you are appropriating and like saying that AI are just a simulation, and yet there seems to be real emotion and humanity, for lack of a better word, in this. So, like ethically, like that would have been, quite good with to have there. But there's still really good things to explore.
It's that thing of like when it's a short story and I don't enjoy it, I'm glad it's over. But when it's a short story and I do enjoy it, I'm like, why couldn't you have made this into a full-size novel, or maybe even a series if it was good enough?
I think sometimes there's not enough there. Like, how many times have we had a full-size novel that we're like, oh, they could have cut a lot
this
out. This
would have been a great short story.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the whole point of short stories is to explore themes, and he's done that, right? That's what he's done. He's wanted to explore a theme see if there's something there, and if there's not, if there is, he'll go more into it like he did with Wool, or if not, he goes, okay, that's great, this is something to sit with, marinate on, but you move on or you look at it in different ways. And it's interesting, no spoilers, but I feel like Hank, if you want a longer format, you've got to read the 2 books from Hank Green, which also actually was explore a lot of this, but from from a humanity kind of point of view. And I think I've said before, I really enjoyed the second book of that, possibly more than the first for those reasons. So if you did really enjoy this, guys, go check out that book.
I will once Kirsten's read it.
I know. I will. I'll get to it. I've got things that I'm reading. I must say, I really liked the haikus in this, by the way.
They were
They were good.
I thought they were really, really good.
Yeah. Very.
You'd want them to be good too, like when you're writing this guy as like the ultimate haikuer.
Yeah.
You want your haikus to be on point.
I'm not a poetry person in general, so I was like, oh, I really liked those.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
only
the
when
kind of
read
I
by
need to
John
read
Green.
really short ones.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. And it's always the best bits that you want. I've never read The Raven by Eleanor Poe.
The Raven.
But that's
favourite
I'm
poem.
not a poetry person, but I love The Raven.
Right. I've never read it, but I know, pieces of it, but the best bits. And Winnie the Pooh, a lot of that is poetry from memory. So, but yes.
I wonder.
And you can't ignore a good slam poet. Poetry when performed by the poet can be very powerful.
Oh, I can ignore slam poetry very easily. It is not my thing.
Fickle.
It's like interpretive dance. It has to be really amazing, otherwise I'm not on board.
And to be fair, I've only ever really watched Amazing Ones because those are the ones that get shared, that I've been sent or shared or found are the really amazing people.
You've got curated slam poetry.
Maybe that's right. Internet's top 5. Make me a list.
And so go find these people. We'll get all the advertising revenue, and they won't get anything.
Exactly. I was just thinking before, Sarah, what you're saying about how the first chapter of Wool, the prologue, was released as a short story. I wonder how many times an author will do that, and whether they how much thought goes into I'm writing this as just an exploratory thing, or I'm writing it as an exploratory thing with also the potential of a backdoor pilot into a fuller series kind of thing. It's do you think that it was easy with Wool, I think, because of the way that was done, it left a lot of things open, but this one kind of ended with the world being destroyed, so I don't know if that was really the case here. I don't know, there was much else for it to go, at least with these characters.
The mystery has sort of been solved, what went on, so whereas in War it was just sort of this snapshot that that mystery was still there, and there was heaps to build on.
I don't know the history behind when he wrote the prologue short story to when he went started writing the rest of it, but I like to think that he sat with it for so long and think, well, why was this place here? What was it? And then went, fuck, everyone wants to know this shit. Might as well just try and figure it out, because you left that short story, that prologue, going, what the fuck? Where are we? How did this happen? Who are these people? It was just all these questions. And, I don't know whether he intended that, because it's a really good setup, right, for the prologue of Wool. It's a really good setup. It's set coming to an end. And I think it was published before he did the rest of it.
Yeah, it was, I think it ended up being published as 5 parts or something, but that was the first
prologue?
one, and I can't remember the prologue. Yeah. He did that first, and I can't remember whether, people just said we want more, or whether he'd actually planned to do more. because I think it ended up he just released most of it, the section of it on the internet, bit by bit, and then Wool, of course, is just those. Is it 5 parts or something?
The 5
all in one.
Yeah.
So he did them one by one. But I can't
So
remember
maybe
whether
he
the
did-
first one he was doing that all along, or whether he just put that first part out and people just said they wanted more.
Yeah, and maybe that. I mean, and it's not a bad way, like you said,
Yeah.
Matt. It is almost like a pilot. Like, let me put this out there. Let me see what because he was self-publishing at that point. He was an undiscovered author, and it's a great way to kind of go, well, let's see what people think. Oh, they like it. Okay, well, I'm happy to keep exploring this, and I'm gonna, and then it just the world. And admittedly, the second one, which I think goes back in time, I got quite lost with. Like, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm getting a bit confused here. But the third one, I was back on board. So
Shift was a little bit of work for me to get my head around.
It was a bit of suspension of disbelief for me and trying to figure things out. But by the third one, I was right in there. So I was back in with the crew. I don't know. I like to think that sometimes authors write things and then sit with them and then want to do like take it further. Like, is that what happened with Sisters of the Vast Black? I think wasn't that like a short story and then it got expanded out into like a novella? Mel might be able to remind us.
No, that wasn't the case with that one. However, Murderbot that's what's happening with that.
Yeah.
It started out as a novella and now she's writing novels off it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it depends on the way the writer writes in the first place too, because I think some writers kind of start with a general idea and kind of it evolves as they write and they're not sure themselves where it's going to end up. And other writers are like, I have a plan and this is my plan of how the story is going to be, and I've got my outline and I know I have to hit these plot points along, and then it's just how I write it in between. And I don't know about Hugh Howey about
why are they called pantsers?
I know that George R.R. Martin is the former, like I'm just going to write and see what happens kind of, and that's why he's kind of
that's the kind that's the pantsers. They write by the seat of the pants.
Gotcha.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get that.
Unlike,
I
do they like to make sure they have their pants on first, or like?
Basically.
Is it a getting dressed metaphor?
Yeah.
I don't understand. Right.
Yeah.
Makes more sense.
Cool.
So it really would depend on.
I think there is, a type of writer where they have this story in their head, they've built this world in their head, and they're like, let's just write something based in that world that I have this big idea about. I'm just going to sit down and write something about that world, and then they publish it or see how it goes or something. But they've got that little story that they've just gotten out of their head of this big world that they just sit and imagine.
Yeah. And that's
they do
kind
that
of like
different. They do that at different lengths too. Like if you look at Becky Chambers, her first book is quite clearly just her establishing a world, and then when it was popular she went and told other stories in that world, but she didn't continue that story because there was nothing else to tell about those characters.
Yeah.
I really like
that. I like that she did the way she did it, but also I miss those original characters.
I did miss them as well, but I'm glad that like I guess I was, because I was a X-Files fan way back when, and I got stung by the way that the writers for that kind of didn't know where they were going with it, and it just kind of went like fizzled at
Good thing you weren't a huge Lost fan.
There was no real plan of where the arc was going to begin.
I gave up. I never finished Lost for the same reason.
Yeah, I gave up early on.
Yeah. Whereas
the stupid thing was Lost had a plan, and then they had a writer's strike, and then instead of finishing the plan when they should have, no, hang on, was that?
No, that's not Lost. Lost was literally Lost was the lockbox thing, and he was like, I deliberately wrote this not knowing what the answer was.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not about that, it's about how the mystery engages you. It was always going to be a flop at the end because they didn't know.
Yeah. I think
but they kept telling everyone, "Oh, we've got a plan." It's like they did not have a plan.
Heroes did the same thing to me. Like, I really enjoyed the first season.
Heroes had the writer's strike.
Yeah, and then and then it all went weird. And then I just went, okay, I'm not enjoying this anymore. And you seem to have not known where you're going anymore, where it seemed very paced really well. There was mystery. And yes, you're throwing time into it. Time is always going to confuse stuff, and especially when people start using it as like a deus ex machina. But yeah, like Heroes had that issue. And the other one that had that issue, sorry, Matt, but Babylon 5 was doing so well, and then they were told they had to wrap it up. So they put all this plot in, and they said, "Oh, we're going to extend you." And then it was like, eh?
Yeah.
It was just like,
So,
oh my God.
so that was a slightly different case.
Babylon 5.
Yeah.
No, it's a slightly different case, because what happened was he was told they weren't getting renewed.
Yeah.
And so he compressed two seasons into one.
I know,
and then
but then they said, oh, then it did really well, because everyone said, oh, I need to watch it. So they're like, oh, we'll give you another season. But instead of going, well, I don't really have enough for another season, he just took it. And then these awful, elongated storylines started happening. And I gave up for the same reason, because I was like, oh, it was like,
season 5
action-packed.
was always meant to be the second half or last third of season 4. But it got kicked out and became a whole season to itself, when it was really more like about 5 episodes worth.
Yeah, which never feels good.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Yeah, I don't know. It's I like that that idea of exploring things within the world you create. I mean, and not to speak of She Who Shall Not Be Named, but it's one of the reasons I really enjoyed the Fantastic Beasts first movie, because it was like, here is this world that's been created that we all kind of know, but we're in a slightly off-kilter part of it because we're off in the States at a slightly different time, and there's small references, but you don't have to know any of that. And then they're tried to tie it together, and I'm like, I'm bored now, because I didn't care about those people. We'd wrap that up. I like that idea of going, here is a universe, here is a world, here are magic systems or sci-fi, science. This is the grounding that you need to build. And like you said, like Mel said, that Becky Chambers, I love, like one of my favorite books, of course, is Record of a Spaceborne Few. And it's set in that universe, but it's a different kettle of fish from the other 2 books. But
and yet it still has those little nods to the characters, but they're in no way actually involved in the plot. It's just a little nod.
Yeah. Which you get a little moment, but it doesn't take anything away from anybody else.
Yeah.
So we've watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy over the last 3-4 nights. And because I've been listening to 20,000 Hertz and a few other podcasts, so I've heard the Willem scream 3 times, and each time I go, whoa!
Yeah.
It was like, what? I'm like, that was the Willem scream.
I know. Watch Star Wars too.
I know.
But it's really cool. Once you know about it, you hear it in so many things.
It's in everything. Yeah. So it was nice to get that little like, that's and then Peter Jackson turns up like 3 times and like little cameos, and you see that, you go, oh, that's the director.
It's like
he just got shot
in the Marvel movie when you get that really little cameo.
Yeah, but so but I on the book, I like, as you guys know, I do enjoy books set on American university campuses, or even on an English, like, I don't know. It's not like my experience. In fact, I don't think it's like anybody in New Zealand or Australia's experience of going to university. We don't have these big live on campuses, some of the older ones do, but most people move out and go flatting, in their second year, and
I think there's like it's almost like there's a college mythology, or almost like a fetishization about going and living on campus in American universities.
Well, Bobby mentioned that it is because I mentioned it in one of the other books we read, the one with the bee on the cover. And I said, like, he was in his dorm room in his winter, and I loved all those vibes. She's like, oh, there's a whole genre of this. And I'm like, really? Because, I remember when I got you guys read Fool on the Hill, which is, Matt Ralph's first book, set at Cornell University, which is, one of the Ivy League schools. And it was a formidable book for me back in my late teens and early 20s. So it was like, this kind of stuff. So I was quite excited to be on campus. And it was interesting because I was trying to figure out, like, he's going to the labs, to use them. I'm like going, when is the set? Because I went to tech back in the late 1990s, and I too would go to the university computer labs because we didn't have internet or computers at home. I would drive in and sit on the internet and do stuff in the computer labs. So
I think as someone who works at a university, the main difference now, we still get a lot of like students coming in and using just the regular lab computers, but that kind of like really specifically coming in to use the thing would be in HPC, high performance computing. Like that's the kind of thing you come in specifically to use those computers to do something rather than just so there's still a bit of that.
Which
That.
Is what he was doing. They were research computers to run algorithms.
Yeah.
Like once he logged on, I was like, oh, now I understand. Because that was like, when it was there, I was like, when does this set? Because I just had this vision of like, it
was slightly ambiguous. Like, it kind of felt like, okay, well, it's a little bit beyond now because they've got quantum computers doing the work, but like, how far down the track is it? Because it still feels familiar enough that it could be just a little bit in the future.
It reminded me a little bit of Ready Player One in that whole, like, here's all these people that are into doing this, going into this simulated world and jacking into the computer so that they can, and they talked about like they were getting like sores on their sides of their head from the things and stuff. And except it was it seemed to be just the university that was doing it rather than the general public, kind of like in the you didn't read the Doomsday book, did you, Sarah? I think you read it, Mel.
Yeah, I did.
And it was a similar thing with that, except it was time travel. Like, time travel exists, but it's just the university that has it. Like, the general public can't time travel. It's like the university students are the ones that are, in the universities are running it.
For a very specific purpose, research.
Yeah. Well, that's the same as, except instead of doing historical research like they were with the time travel, they're doing like scientific research. And then there was the part with the people stealing art in various forms.
There's a Spanish show about time travel where they're trying to stop, like, they're time cops essentially.
I know the one you mean.
And, and it's a lot of that. They're trying to stop stuff being stolen, like basically IP. Like, this person wrote this, and we're gonna,
that's interesting. Because you could go back in time to
go to the future
before something was written, and then take that thing and then pretend it was you that wrote it before the person who actually wrote it.
That's that wonderful thing out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Where they took the Hitchhiker's Guide, got written and then put into the future and then sent way to the past, and no one actually knew who wrote it. Like, does anyone else
I have read it, but I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
I've forgotten about that bit, yeah.
I always really liked it. And but I'm trying to remember that. I've never seen it, but apparently it's very good. Channel show. Here we are. It was on Netflix, but it got moved or something.
El Ministerio.
That's the one. The Ministry of Time.
Tiempo.
It's got 8.2 on IMDb, so it shows it's quite good. But I think they're also trying to prevent murder, and because people are trying to create more libertarian type pasts, and move away from the Catholic Church back in the past, but that's going to affect the future, and what does it actually mean? And it's kind of interesting.
There's a bit of that in the Just Before books too. In like they have the Chrono Guard. Their job is to kind of make sure the timeline. And her dad's in the Chrono Guard, and he keeps popping in and going like,
what year is it again?
Who won the war between, and she'll answer and he'll be like, damn it, because it's like wrong, and he's got to go back and like fix it again.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I always that scene in those Just Before novels was when going into the black hole and just slowing to a stop, whatever they threw in, I can't remember what it was, or the car that went in, the vehicle, and it was like, because it's accurate, like you'll never see it go over the edge, it will just like stop.
It appears
Yeah.
like it stopped at the event horizon. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I always remember like going, oh, and then, but it always just sort of stayed with me, like this sort of death frozen in time kind of thing. Yeah. I think it's really interesting about how we feel about those artificial intelligence and who things belong to and that type of stuff, because what we've talked about this, there's artificial intelligence and then there's sentient intelligence, and that's where I thought this book actually made it quite clear that these were sentients, not just like they were aware of themselves and they lived life according to community codes and things like that, and it was how the scientists affected them that like what they threw at them that changed everything. But I think that's always been an interesting thing that people don't explain or explore enough in I don't read all the sci-fi in the world, but explaining that difference between artificial intelligence to becoming sentient artificial intelligence. I know we talked about it in Her quite a bit when we did that, and some of the other things that we've looked at.
We did a hangout that I think was your idea, Sarah, where we talked about just AI in general and got into a lot of this stuff there too.
Yeah, I thought so.
We were talking about things like,
it was a long time ago.
Saying please when you talk to Siri and stuff like that, and like, was it in that hangout we were talking about? There was a robot and like it was a robot that a university had made, and then I can't even remember it now.
The Boston Dynamics, and they like test it, and people get angry because it looks like an actual animal.
Because that's like kicking it and pushing it over and that kind of stuff.
And I was like, it was really.
People get upset over it. It's like I see why, I understand that feeling, but also
because there's an uncanny valley to it.
Uncanny valley.
It actually comes out
so
of
much
the
like an
uncanny
animal.
valley. And up to the other side where you go, it looks and seems sentient, or it looks too similar to, so it kind of affects you. And it's, I think we talked about in that hangout about self-driving cars and all of that, and just basically how there'll be, until everybody is in one, it's going to be a failure because people will treat others like, if there's a self-driving car on the road, you'll treat it like shit. Because it's it's bad enough there are people who are shitty drivers to people in other cars like doing stupid things, but imagine when it's going to be a mixture of both. So
like that lady who just like straight up scratched a stranger's Tesla because she was just a bad-mannered bitch, and this man had done nothing to her. She just saw a Tesla and she just scratched it. There's going to be people like that on the road driving next to those cars.
Or they'll just be like, well, it doesn't matter because that car will always stop for me, and it doesn't matter if I do something dangerous because that car will brake properly. Well, you don't know that. So was there anything else that we wanted to explore?
I think we kind of gone a little bit off topic, but not really. Like we're kind of tangenting, but sort of interesting conversations that are tangents from the book. I suppose for a book this short, there's only so much we can say about the actual book. Yeah. But
I thought it was interesting that the world that he was going to didn't seem that different. Like the one that he was most attracted to. But maybe that made sense. Like maybe that's because he hated his own life, that he actually was just looking for something that was like his but better. Like it was like an advertisement.
He definitely seemed like he hated his own life, and he was he found that sort of escape. Or maybe it sounded like he was visiting different worlds, and then he met that Bellatrix. Because it sounded like he was saying, I was once, I went to all the different worlds to find stuff. So he was definitely going to human worlds because of the literature. But I think maybe he didn't go into it. Maybe it's because he met her that he stayed at that particular world.
Also,
and I guess if he's gonna, develop a relationship with someone, it's probably going to be someone who's more Earth-like. So,
to put into context too, 2011 would have been around about the time when Second Life was actually pretty popular.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, he did actually, didn't he mention that at the beginning? He said he used to laugh at all these people who would spend their lives, like you talked about that. I'm sure he made a reference to Second Life.
It wasn't
actually.
explicit to Second Life, but it was
Okay,
it was
but
about
I
that kind of
read
thing.
Second
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. And I do remember back, it must have been around that time, Mel. Yeah, I do remember like all the podcasts talking about it.
Oh, it's going to be so big.
It's going to be so big. It was like this, like I presume it's still around in some form, but people
It
like
is.
real estate in there and all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff. And,
We
you know.
had one lecturer in law who was like so convinced that it was just going to be the future of teaching that they like got hired people to go and buy real estate in Second Life and build virtual courtrooms and all this kind of stuff, and just like that was going to be and for about 2 years I think they did do stuff in Second Life, but then it stopped.
Yeah.
It was not the next big thing.
No.
Yeah.
Did anyone? The only other thought I had about the book was whether any of the other humans, in his world that he interacted with, whether any of those might have been visitors from like higher up levels or not. The only person I wasn't sure about maybe was that other guy that like he was like saying hello to towards the end there, and it was more I guess around the time. Yeah, and it was kind of more around the timing and everything. I thought, this guy we haven't really talked about has just turned up just at when shit's about to go down.
That didn't really, yeah.
I didn't think of it.
But he seemed to be working too hard to be just there for,
research purposes.
Yeah, writing lots of, what was it, GCTs?
Oh, yeah.
Some amino acid
I was thinking,
protein codes, Gattaca.
Yep.
I would not be able to do that job. I would come back out and go, fuck, what was it again?
Always doing that.
I like how they said, what was it, coffee, the recreational drug of choice turned from coffee to Adderall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, just need to focus and remember stuff.
All those people with photographic memories just got rich.
Yeah. That was pretty much his main talent, other than being able to write haikus. He just had that photographic memory. So which in that particular time, in that particular world, was a useful commodity to have, valuable.
Well, and I suppose memory had been, like he talked about the first person who did try and take credit for all of it, but that's what they had was a photographic memory. Turned out that, and it was kind of written like disparagingly, but then the character himself had exactly that. But it's interesting. I'm just ruminating. I'm like, well, that memory, that is actually what the ye olde storytellers, that's what they had to have, because everything was oral tradition. So you had to know your verse and your parameter to remember great swathes of story, and spew them forth. And you probably put your own take on it, of course. But like that's how all those Greek tales, the Odyssey and Iliad and all of the mythology was handed down, and not just there as well, but across all traditions was oral traditions. Indigenous people in Australia also had oral traditions, as did New Zealand Indigenous people. So the great storytellers, that's what they had to have, was an amazing memory for not just the one but lots of them. I'm like, okay, gotta remember all the stories and what happened at what point.
And that's how we get all these different versions of fairy tales in all these different different parts of the world that have got kind of the same story, but they've got, it's changed over
but
time.
Not just fairy tales, Kirsten. I found this because YouTube algorithm. I found this amazing channel, which is this guy who basically delves into scriptures and text from different religious cultures and dissects it, and basically like why, like where do we get, like, so one of the ones I watched is where do we get the name Lucifer from, because it's only mentioned once in one, and it's really interesting. And one of the things that he talked about was a particular story that's everybody has it, like everybody. So it was kind of like, it turned up in this religious text and this one, but it's also a fairy tale, and it's like, so exactly to your point, like it's like not just the fairy tales, but it's almost also those stories that that I think he was even talking about the Great Flood, of the biblical text, is actually also features in other traditions. And it's like, well, they also talked about this thing that happened, which maybe have been based on truth in this particular region, that there was a really crappy flood that was really, really devastating, and then it became, what did they say in Lord of the Rings? Became legend and then became myth.
Yeah.
I liked that, the way the screenwriters write that, the story becomes legend and then becomes myth, which is how it kind of moves through. So I liked that.
Yeah, I've heard that too, that the flood stories in not even just places that were geographically close, even in places that are very far away from each other, they have flood stories, I suppose, because a lot of cultures would have had experience of some flood at some point in time. But yeah, it's a very common theme.
And and then maybe it's because of these storytellers with photographic memories who would travel around places and collect stories as they went and did their own cultural appropriation and said, that's a good one, I'll use that, thanks.
Yeah, especially in a time where people can't just connect on the internet and go, well, actually, you stole that from such and such. No one's going to know. If you're the only traveler that's been to all these places and you bring back the stories.
Even in mythology, like if you look at several different mythologies, there's like the story of the three fates. There's lots of threes in different ones, and they're all very similar across the different mythologies. These three figures are all usually to do with fate or weaving the tapestry of time and things like that. And they're in a whole bunch of different mythologies, and they're all very much the same.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's I think he was talking about the numbers and stuff, like special, like why is certain numbers have religious meaning, and this is like, well, actually it wasn't. It was actually in all types of areas, and it was down to the currency that was divisible by this particular amount. That's things like that came up. I'm just going to find you what the channel is amongst all my channels. Oh, here it is. It's called, let me see, home. I wish I could find you like what it, I'm on my phone so it doesn't look like crash shot. Oh, here we are. Okay, can you guys see this?
Pochilaga.
Yeah.
Pochilaga.
Well worth a watch. Good stuff. Recommend. I just started, I was like, oh, that was pretty cool. Yeah, here it is, the origin of the 7 deadly sins. Like, where did that come from? And like, it was really interesting because there's it was basically saying, well, the whole bit really is Chaucer. It doesn't have a lot to do, like the Bible stuff is a bit different. That was really cool. And why 7? And that was a really good one. And then what else did I watch? There's a couple of them. Oh, this was the best one. Mythical creatures in the Bible. And they were talking about certain ones. And one of the ones I kept saying was really scary is basically, it's a hippo. It's a hippo. Yeah, it's a hippo.
Hippos are scary.
Well, they are very scary.
They are terrifying. But it was just like, it's like, oh my God, this creature is like going, it's a hippo. It was really funny. It was so funny. And I was just like, yeah. And then, like there's basically, I think one of them's an elephant and stuff like that. But the hippo one was very, very funny. It was yeah, so that was quite cool. On the end, Lucifer explained the origin and meaning behind the fallen angel, which is like, well, Lucifer, like star of the morning and all this, and it's like this name that was being given wasn't what it was referring to, because translation, guys, not always perfect. They're doing their best.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, that's all about oral tradition and memorizing.
It's kind of related to the book.
Kind of related to the story. So, you know, he just needs to put his own take on it, and then, you know, it wouldn't have been, you know, said, okay, this audience sees it like this. And you can't, you know, and that's not to be disparaging of translators. They're doing their best, and, you know, you have good translators and you have crap translators. So, yes. You know, Mel's disappeared, so we can't get her to stop recording, but I think we might be done.
There she is.
There she is. Look at this timing. I think we're done, Mel.
I was coming, I was hurrying as fast as I could. I could hear that it was starting to wrap.
We were like, let's fill up.
Fill up. And I'm like pouring my hot water. Okay, thank you for anybody who was watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'm impressed that you stuck with us. Well done.